Normally, just so that you know, I take 2 hours to do what I'm going to share with you. We're not going to do 2 hours today. So that means what I'm going to be sharing is going to be fast, furious, and intense because I'm going to try to cram 2 hours into 30 or 40 minutes. But here's a parable. So we are in the 19th century in the Midlands, and there's a small English village, and there's only one employer in town. It's the coal mine or it's the factory or whatever. And there's a rich, powerful man who sits up on top of the hill, and basically everybody in the village is dependent on that man for his existence. And that man is a very gifted communicator, very gifted persuader. He could sell an ice cube to an Eskimo. So there's a reason he's successful. So one day he comes into work and he's got this bowl, like a mixing bowl, and in it are eggs and milk and sugar. And he calls his managers into his office and he says, "Hey, look at my cake." And one of the managers made the silly mistake of saying, "Excuse me, sir, that's not a cake." And he goes, "I say it's a cake." "But sir, it's not a cake." "I said it's a cake. And if you want to work here, you're going to call that a cake." Well, being that he's the only employer in town and that he has the power to basically punish anybody who disagrees, the manager says, "Yes, sir, I'm sorry, it's a cake." So then all the managers go down to their departments and they say, when the boss brings in a bowl of eggs and sugar and milk, it's called cake. And everybody looks rather strange, but they say, "Okay, if you say so," because the powerful, persuasive man who has the power to punish says it's cake. Generations go by, people die, and new people come to employ. The manager dies, but his son inherits. And within that factory in the Midlands, a bowl of eggs, milk, and sugar become known as cake. And the moral of the story is the persuasive presentation of something incomplete eventually becomes the definition of the thing and misrepresents the item. My premise today is I believe we are living in the days where Western Protestant evangelicalism is just like the bowl of eggs and milk. It presents itself as cake, but it's not cake. And since we've had 500 years of an incomplete sort of presentation where basically the most important ingredient in the cake is missing, which is, of course, flour. Now, the eggs, the milk, the sugar can all contribute. They can all be a part. But without the essential thing, you don't have the real thing. And we've had 500 years, if you're from a Protestant tradition, of a certain presentation of a so-called gospel that I believe so badly misrepresents the gospel that it doesn't qualify to be called gospel. So my metaphor is it's not cake. But if we live in a constrained subculture like evangelicalism, we'll start to call something that's not what it is. And so today, what I want to do is just talk about two categories. And this is going to be, like I said, fast and intense. And if this is of any value to you when we're done, we can you can make notes. And if there's anything you'd like to follow up on, and another time we can do it. But here's what we're going to do for today. Just two categories: things invisible and things visible. So what I'm going to do first is present a very typical Western 21st century evangelical summation of the typical message that somebody gets when they go to church. Okay, so that's where we're going to start. All right, and I'm just going to go through some items, and you're going to see what they all have in common. Heaven or hell? You going to heaven or you going to hell? You know what that topic has? It's invisible. We're talking about invisible things. And see, you can't guarantee them, but we try to guarantee them, and it's called assurance. And so you teach a doctrine of assurance, which is also invisible. Your neighbor can't see that you're assured of your salvation. So even salvation itself becomes an invisible thing. Trinitarian debates, mysticism. We can respect the church fathers, but we've got to admit that they got lost very we can respect them for the fights that they had to fight, the issues they had to face, what they had to do. But the fact is, they approach everything on a Platonic, Greek, metaphysical, invisible battles, arguing about invisible things. Righteousness. Luther's doctrine of righteousness goes like this: you're not righteous at all. There's no good thing in you. Matter of fact, you can be a terrible person, but in the invisible courts of heaven, you've been invisibly declared righteous, and before God, you are righteous invisibly. And Luther was very aggressive about that, as you might expect. And that's where they started to separate out justification and sanctification. There's no transformative element in your justification. That's a basic Lutheran proposition. So in a typical evangelical church, the messages try to assure people of their acceptance, their assurance, their salvation in invisible things. Even sanctification. You would think that sanctification has something to do with how we live and how we behave, but not in evangelicalism, because it goes like this. Sanctification is a realm of the human heart, and that's the realm of God. And who are we to judge somebody else's heart and what God is doing in the secret recesses of his heart? So the guy's a wife-beating, alcoholic, child abuser, but he's given his heart to the Lord. And every tree bears fruit in its season, and we can't judge. And so if you actually begin to question something, you're accused of being judgmental and not understanding the gospel. Faith itself, because for a typical evangelical, faith is intellectual consent to abstract propositions from the Bible that's invisible, instead of relational trust in a resurrected human being. I am convinced that the average Christian has a theory from the Bible, and they have never had some reality encounter in time and space with the resurrected God-man. We're going to talk about more of that in a minute. So even faith is, for your typical evangelical, an invisible quality. How about, I hope none of you have ever heard this, but I have, the spirit realm. The spirit realm is where reality is. It goes like this: I am a spirit who has a soul and lives in a body. That's 100% Gnostic. That's a misreading of the passage in Thessalonians. And again, it's to push reality into the invisible realm. So we talk about, well, the spirit realm, that's where reality is. No, in the incarnation, Jesus sanctified the entire cosmos and the entire material order of the cosmos. How about this one? Spiritual warfare. You ever been to one of those spiritual warfare conferences? We're going to take our city. And what you do is you pray, you shout, you carry on for 45 minutes or an hour. And we've done this incredible thing to win our cities to Jesus. And anybody who's over 40 who's listening to me today knows that nothing happens. Nothing changes. But boy, we feel significant. You know why? Because our idea of spiritual warfare is invisible. Even our union, as powerful as that is, and as important as that is, it's invisible. Your neighbor can't see your union with Christ. Your boss can't see your union with Christ. It's an invisible thing. And there are people that they just write posts and books about the important, our union, our union, our union, or the Trinity, the mysteries of the Trinity. Invisible, 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 invisible. How many of you have ever heard of this one? Well, God's going to take us to the next level. Level of what? What level? That is also invisible, and it's also Gnostic. The Gnostics believed in 365 different levels of progressions into enlightenment. But when a Christian says we're going to go to the next level, I say, well, what's it going to look like? Well, I don't know, but God's going to take us there. So even in that language of our concept of what spirituality is, it's invisible. Speculation on the end times. Here's the deal. You're not there. I'm not there. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We can speculate about things that are today invisible because we're not there. How about the presence of God? If you go to a typical evangelical church service, at least a third, if not a half, of the church service is devoted to trying to give people an experience in an invisible thing, the presence of God. Oh, the presence, the presence, the presence. There are only 6 references to the presence of God in the New Testament, and none of them have anything to do with praise and worship. Now, for those of you that know me for a while, I've got a whole book on this topic and how did it come to be in evangelicalism, the singing and the banners and all that. But at the end of the day, it's a commitment to invisible things. How about dreams and visions? If you have a seminar and you give a seminar and say, we're going to teach you how to interpret dreams and visions, the room will be packed. But if you have a seminar telling about how to live a cruciform existence and self-giving, radically forgiving, co-suffering love, the room will be empty. Because we want to get spiritual significance from invisible things. So in this side of the ledger, I hope you can see the commonality is invisible, 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 invisible. Now, I'm not saying that some of these things aren't important, but they're like the eggs in the milk in the bowl. They may be ingredients, but if we miss something else, which I'm going to get to, we don't have cake. And that's the problem. That's why people are fed up with Christianity. They're fed up with rhetoric from the Bible. They're fed up with Christian hypocrites. And our culture doesn't care about our theories. Or another example would be folks that want to speculate about or argue about Calvinism versus Arminianism, as if anybody under 30 years old cares about that. But all those arguments are arguing about what? Invisible things. Meanwhile, the poor are hungry, the naked need to be clothed, our society is collapsing, and we're going to spend time debating 16th century metaphysics. No wonder the gospel is perceived by so many as something utterly irrelevant and utterly useless. Now, let's flip it over. Let's talk about what the scriptures actually present to us and see what they have in common. And you guys are smart enough to know where I'm going to go. Let's start at the beginning. The incarnation is what? Visible. His life, his ministry was visible. You can't imitate a theory. Paul says, follow me as I follow the Lord. Visible, visible, visible. The Eucharist, visible. I have a 5-hour video series on my page where I keep all my videos, so I can't do justice to this topic. But there's a strain of anti-sacramental Gnosticism in evangelicalism that wants to turn that into something all mystic and invisible, when the whole point of the Eucharist is to continually orient the church to something that's tangible in time and space. This is something we do that is visible. This is my body. It's an orientation to go against that trend to turn everything into invisible abstractions about theories. Again, do 5 hours on that. Can't unpack that today. The transfiguration, visible. His suffering, visible. His crucifixion, visible. His resurrection, visible. Excuse me. The ascension, visible. And here's one that'll chafe some perhaps, but the Spirit outpouring on Pentecost was what? Visible. Are you guys seeing a theme in basic Christianity? Now, for the anti-charismatics and the people who have a chip on their shoulder against charismatic things, we're going to take a slight detour here. No one has devoted more of their life than me than addressing the psychosis in my own family of God. But we either face that passage or we develop some sort of cessationist theory where, we have a feeling in our hearts, when we have a feeling in our heart. Man, that's what the Mormons do. So even the Spirit outpouring was visible. The development of the body of Christ, the life of Christ manifest in mortal flesh amongst a people. Paul's admonition to the Corinthians, and I'm going to have fun with this. Now, make sure you get your doctrine of the end time correctly. Make sure you don't embrace Calvinism. That's not what he said. But here's what he said: that the life of Christ might be made manifest, and that means evident to all five senses in our mortal bodies. Saints, folks, that is visible. The indwelling, the gifts of the Spirit, same thing. We can go to two, like Goldilocks porridge on the issue of gifts in the Spirit. Too hot, too cold, it's hard to find something that's just right. I know the gifts of the Spirit can be faked, manipulated, hyped, and abused. I understand that. They can be mechanically taught. They can be duplicated by witches and anybody that wants to. The thing that validates the Christian, the gifts of the Spirit, are understanding three things. Number one, they are not accessories to some other deeper reality. The gifts of the Spirit are the concretions of the reality of Jesus in resurrection in time and space. We're back in the visible realm again. The issue or the way I separate them from what the occultists can do is this: the real gifts of the Spirit are under the governance of Jesus, the resurrected God-man, and they embody the ethics of Jesus: radically forgiving, co-suffering love. A Christianity without the healthy function of the gifts of the Spirit boils down to a rhetoric society, a society of theories. And if anybody has the misfortune to spend time on Facebook, you're going to see arguments about all these rhetorical things, when the essence of the gospel is about a present visible reality. How about this one? How do you know followers of Jesus? Well, it's because of their doctrine. You've got to have pure doctrine. You've got to have right doctrine. That's what Luther taught. We're doing okay on time. A quick diversion. In Luther's disputes with the Anabaptists, here's what he said. He admitted that they were absolutely faultless as followers of Jesus in their character, in the way they live. And here's his exact phrase: but that doesn't matter because their doctrine is wrong. Guys, we have been suffering with that Lutheran virus for 500 years. And that's why he could justify persecuting them, incarcerating them, how he could justify unchristlike ethics while supposedly pursuing and representing Jesus. See, I don't buy that anymore. I'm done with that universe. That universe has proven itself to be futile. That belief system has proven itself to be useless and non-transformative. No, here's how we know someone is a believer. Look at how they love one another. Visible. I had the privilege once of being part of a local church. I'll make a very long, wonderful story short. An agnostic and his Hindu wife walked in to a service, saw how much they loved one another, and said, "What do you people have? We want it." No altar calls, no preaching about heaven or hell, no threats about eternal judgment, no threats about an angry God. But coming into a community that a stranger can come into your midst and see something visible, depending on your end time theology, a visible second coming of the Lord. I know preterists, others have other theories. I'm not going into the deep parts of that, but let's just go with this. This Jesus who you have seen will come again. And here's a news flash for some Christians. Jesus is not a spirit. Jesus is not a ghost. He's not coming back in the spirit realm. He was resurrected bodily. They could touch him. His His material existence had been transformed into another dimensional order of existence. But the point is, it's visible. Let me give you some more. I'm just going to give you some more kind of one-liners. When you have properly exegeted the scriptures and understand the fallacies of the penal substitutionary atonement theory, then you will really be a believer. It's not, of course, what it says. When you have seen me, you have seen the Father, visible. And the visible pointing to the invisible. Here's what we want to do. We want to lecture people about invisible things and then give ourselves a pass when they don't see anything in us that resembles what we teach. That is the essence of hypocrisy. Jesus said, when you have done it to the least of these, you've done it to me. Visible. The visible leading to the invisible. Here's the big one. By their position on Calvinistic double election, you will know whether they're really followers. No. You will know them by their fruit. Visible. Acts 4:13. They took note that these men had been with Jesus. Something seen, something visible. Paul to the Galatians. Jesus evidently crucified before you, visible. He who does these mighty works of the Spirit. Otherwise, Paul is appealing to an experiential reality that was visible in their midst as an evidence of two things: the legitimacy of his apostleship and the legitimacy of his message. He didn't say, let's go have a coffee and let's go debate theories of atonement. He could point to their very experience. How about when I hit this one already, when Paul says, imitate me as I imitate the Lord. You can't imitate a theory. You can't imitate a theory. You imitate something you see. John, if you don't love your brother who you can see, how can you claim to love God who you cannot see? Again, the visible pointing to the invisible. It makes you wonder how we've gotten where we are in the sense of your typical evangelical church, and I'll tell you why. Early on, two dimensions. Historically, early on, when the church fathers started getting lost in Platonic and Greek metaphysics, the concept of what is spiritual and what isn't spiritual moved into total transcendence. And the humanity of Jesus was underemphasized. His ethics and his life weren't mentioned at all. And I'm going to hijack this from Brother Michael Harden. He pointed out so rightly. For those of us who understand the great creeds, think about what is missing in the great creeds. I believe in God the Father, maker of heaven and earth, and Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried on the third day. You know, what's not there? His ethics. How he lived was not even in the formulation of early Christian thought. Modern Christians believe this, modern evangelicals, and this is a quote, and I did it in either my master's thesis or doctoral dissertation, and I can't put my finger on the source, but I think it came from B.B. Warfield in Princeton when he said this. And what I'm about to say, I think it's one of the most damaging sentences that has ever been uttered in modern Christianity. And here's what the typical evangelical message is. This is a quote. We do not teach the apostles' experience. We experience the apostles' teaching. Talk about one sentence that wipes out everything that matters about how they actually lived as human beings. Their experiences are no longer relevant to us. Now, I'm not saying we have to have one-for-one, experiences like they had. But what I am saying is that kind of thinking is Gnostic, where only spiritual things are of value. No, visible things are the flower of the cake. Without these things, we don't have the good news. The good news is visible. Now, all those other ingredients might be important. I actually had to show you how prevalent this is, and I'm not exaggerating this in the least. I had a leader of an evangelical mainline Western American church say to me straight to my face, just like this: Jesus is not our example. Jesus just came to die for our sin. He was God in disguise. We can't be God in disguise. So therefore, all his teaching in the Gospels for the Jews, this is a dispensational point of view, but we can't expect to be like him because we're not God. There's not enough time in this session today to explain how messed up that is, how wrong that is, where Jesus is no longer the pattern human. And I think it's utterly degrading, because what it really means is Jesus is nothing other than a piece of meat in time and space that has to be killed to satisfy basically an enraged father. Jesus is reduced down to something transactional, and his existence is just to be killed, rather than he is the head of a new species, a new creation. Even some of those interjections, and I'm wrapping it up here, interjections in some of Pauline's letters. Behold, what does that mean? Look at it. Behold, the new creation, a qualitatively different type of human being. So my premise is, your average evangelical church is unwittingly but thoroughly Gnostic. Gnosticism was resisted in the early church, but it has actually won the day in practice. The essence of Christianity is not how right I am about invisible things, but it's that the life of Christ would be manifest in our mortal flesh. Now, the Corinthians had the opposite problem. Do you remember this? And I am circling the plane to land here. Paul had to correct the Corinthians about the opposite side of this issue, because he said, if in this life only we have hope, we're to be pitied. So what was their problem? They were emphasizing the present too much and ignoring spiritual realities. We are so far the other way that it's gone into full on Gnostic belief system. And if you bring this up, man, you are going to get a reaction from people. So my premise is, every major point of what's contained in the Gospels was visible, and it has been massaged into different categories, and unfortunately different arguments and debates about invisible things. If my neighbor's son has just been incarcerated, they don't care about my need for personal assurance of my salvation. If my neighbor's daughter has just been raped, they don't need to hear about my intertrinitarian doctrine of the perichoretic dance of the inner, not a help. If my neighbor with 7 children has just lost his job, and this is a real example, do you really think he wants to hear about your opinions about Calvinism and Arminianism? But that's the typical Christian message. Arguments about things, particularly in the 21st century, that nobody cares about and not a help at all. So I would suggest we need to get rid of some anti-charismatic bias and fear and prejudgments about manifesting the life of God in this present world, not in the one that we're going to go to when we die. So that's it for today. If you want to put your mics back on, we can kick it around for a while.
Thanks, Steve. I've got to ask, what is that you're drinking? It looks like a test tube from some sort of horror movie.
Yeah, it's actually it's a fruit drink that nobody else in my family likes, so that's why I'm finishing it.
Yeah, it's that was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it was yeah, it's made me think very much. Thanks for joining us, Mick. Nice to see you. And Ruth as well. Yeah, has anybody got anything that they'd like to say or questions they'd like to ask Mick?
Yeah, two points came while you were talking, Stephen, and very interesting. Thank you, Stephen, about the visibility aspect. Yeah, I mean, first of all, straight away came to me about Paul, who said, "I did not come to you with persuasive words and arguments, but with the power of the Spirit." That came to me, and that, of course, is visible. And the other thing which came to me also when it came to visibility is the nature of real visibility and false visibility, which I tie into prophetic teaching and teaching, shall we say, which is not prophetic teaching, shall we say, teaching from the sleeping church.
Got it.
The church which is in slumber and not awake.
Got it.
So when it comes to prophetic teaching, linked in with the aspect of visibility, with prophetic teaching, often an altar call is just not there at all. So when Peter at Pentecost preached, and he preached to the thousands of people there in Jerusalem, he never gave an altar call. The people said to him, "What must we do to get saved?" It was heaven coming down, touching earth, hitting them, and again, very, very visible. Also, with preachers in the past, such as Finney, Wesley, Billy Graham, etc., many is the time that these particular preachers are giving a message, and the people who are listening can't wait to run forward, can't wait to say, "Come on, I want to get saved." It's like it's visible. It's heaven has touched earth, heaven's touched their souls, and they want to respond to the Spirit of God, who has convicted them of their sin, and they are in a terrible state because they want that deliverance and salvation, which has been made so manifest to them by the Spirit of God through prophetic teaching, and again visible. Now, the thing about what I said about real visibility and not real visibility is, well, let's say forced visibility.
Very good.
A preacher gets up, gives an evangelistic type message, and then really cajoles the audience, congregation, crowd, whatever, to put their hands up to get saved. And it's not coming from them, it's coming from the front, it's coming from humanity, it's not coming from God. And you wonder really the status of those salvations anyway. And many is the time you hear a preacher say, "He is here. He's here," you know, meaning the God, I suppose. And it's not true, real visibility. It's pretend. I would call it pretend visibility, because when God is there, everybody knows.
Everybody
And
knows.
I just wish we could be in situations more where we just fall on our knees because, boy, oh boy, God really is here. Anyway,
Wonderfully
those are the things I just wanted to say.
wonderfully said. Provoke two quick ones. A response, and I agree with everything you said. And like I said earlier, I can't remember if you were on me, but I've actually had the privilege of being in one or two meetings where that's actually happened. But that's not a great track record over 47 years. But prophecy, for instance, that the secrets of men's hearts might be revealed. Something brought, but if you mention that to a typical pastor, they will panic because they think of exactly what you just said, some abusive form of psychic manipulation to try to make people feel bad or feel guilty or condemned about their sin. And then supposedly, when it's the real thing, what do the unbelievers in the midst say? Truly, God is with you, not because of how greatly you packaged your hermeneutical sermon, but because of the manifestation of the Spirit, even unbelievers will testify. So the gifts of the Spirit are not our enthusiasms for, our weekly party. One more thing, and then I'll shut up and let somebody else come on, because this is important. I forgot it. Sometimes when I preach this, those that come from a very strong Reformation background just get all up in my grill. You're talking about works righteousness. This has nothing to do with works righteousness. Again, that's Luther's anxiety and Luther's problems being projected onto the scriptures. And I don't have time to unpack all that, but this is not about working and earning our salvation by good behavior. So I just wanted to be clear about that in case anybody's thinking that, behind what I said today is lurking the devil of works righteousness. It's not a works righteousness thing at all.
Excellent.
Perhaps I can pick up on some things. And thank you, Stephen. I thought that was brilliant teaching, brilliantly clear. And I loved your parable and, your intriguing distinction between visible and invisible running through. Very, very clear and memorable.
Thank you, Rich.
And building on Mick's point, I think, and your last point there, Stephen, because it did cross my mind. I mean, knowing you, I knew you were not advocating this, but it did cross my mind that in my case, coming not out of charismatic evangelicalism, but coming out of conservative evangelicalism, there is a legalism, you all know, and a covenantal nomism that's really strong. So what happens at the end of the day is the justification doesn't even need to be an altar call, and what then matters is showing that you are justified. And the way you show it is by doing the right works, not to get saved, but to show that you are saved. And that is a much more insidious trap that put me in hospital and which I've been fleeing from ever since. So whether now or whether you want to, or somebody wants to chip in on the difference between the following the example of Jesus that comes naturally, as opposed to mimicking the works of Jesus, not even consciously to impress other people, but with all sorts of logic, like you want to do that because you're so grateful, you want to do that because that's what the members of the Christian family do, all that sort of really persuasive language. How do we tell the difference both in our own lives and when we're teaching others?
I could take a whack at it, but I'll let somebody else go first.
You go for it, Steve.
Okay. Richard, for me, great question. You're right. It is always lurking kind of there after I share something like this. And thank you for being perceptive enough, even in our short time together, to know that I would never advocate for that. Number one for me is the direction. The way it's normally presented is Godward. This is not about Godward. For me, the Godward side of things is settled. It's not even a question. So I'm not trying to do anything to get God's favor, prove I'm a good boy, or anything. But rather, this is an invitation to exist as a different type of human. An invitation to exist in a different type of humanity. How am I going to know the difference? Because there's going to be a death in the process. See, anything that's not based on a death and resurrection is the wrong thing. We want to see Jesus. Now we're talking about visible things, right? So the Gentiles come and say, we want to see Jesus. And what did Jesus start talking about? Everybody on the call knows this. Except a grain of wheat falls in the ground and dies, it abides alone. So this is how we avoid this whole either fake works righteousness or prove that I'm really saved conversation. The cross, death, and resurrection takes care of it. And there are elements of it that can't be reduced down to, well, A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4. But it reminds me, there's a quote, I think it was one of the Supreme Court justices in the United States when they are debating what is pornography and what is art. And the justice said this, he said, I'll know it when I see it. Otherwise, we could get lost in the long excursions of nuances of this and that versus an intuitive knowing. And in the sense of my own individual psychology, so that I'm not on that gerbil wheel of never measuring up, never being good enough, must not be a real believer, etc., 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 etc. Being grounded in the simple truth of the love of God, and that God has reconciled the world to himself. He's not upset. I don't have anything to prove. It's just about the overflow of another life. I liken it this way. Allow me two metaphors. There's two ways for a glass of water to be full. I can fill it individually, or I can immerse it in the ocean. And that's the difference. It's not about me making sure my little cup is full. It's about my state of being, of existence as a human in a different realm of humanity. And a fish in the ocean is not conscious of the fact that it's a fish in the ocean. The fish has been created to function in that realm. The gills are suited for the environment. So the fish doesn't get up in the morning and say, oh boy, I hope my gills work today. Boy, I better do my devotion so that my gills work today. Oh, I hope God hasn't forsaken my gills. I hope he's happy with me as a fish. Ooh, how do I get to fishy today? Ooh, I really got to make sure my gills pump. No, that's the beauty of the new creation. The new creation, I have been recreated, supposedly, and that could open up another whole can of worms about what a real conversion is. And it's a legitimate conversation. It needs to be had. Slight digression. D. James Kennedy, well-known American megachurch pastor, passed away 10 or 12 years ago, kind of conservative Presbyterian. He said, I saw him out of his own words. He goes, I'm convinced that every Sunday, 75% of the people in front of me in this mega congregation do not know Jesus. So the question of what constitutes a real conversion is a very fair question, but too much for today. My metaphor is God has taken care of creating me suitable for the environment that he's called me to function in. And then my other thing is this one, and I'll try to stop with this. This is not the best rendering, it's a King Jamesy rendering, but it works. The love of God is shed abroad through my heart by the Holy Spirit. I am not trying to prove anything to anybody, including myself. I just need to be open to the river of God through my own heart. Father, to whom is your love flowing today? Not tomorrow, not yesterday, right now. And I just cooperate with that. That's all it is. And how do I cooperate with it? Well, how have I been gifted? What can I bring to the table? So we're right back to charismatic endowment type stuff. And another part, Richard, I think it really would help people is understanding that I don't have to be all things to all people. I'm not suitable for everybody. But now we get into issues of self-awareness. I did a post the other day, you probably saw it, about the importance of self-understanding before you even talk about Christian stuff. Because if you start talking about Christian stuff, when your own self-awareness is not in a good place, you're right, Richard. It is just going to be a layer of oppression on an already broken table. You know, a table with four legs, one's missing, one's about ready to go. And then the message that I just preached, you know, gets put on that table. That whole table is going to collapse unless they're helped about some foundational things. And I know I'm talking a lot because I was asked to. Guys, I am not persuaded of the typical foundational things that a human being gets in evangelicalism. I'm not persuaded. And that's why we have the kind of problems that Richard has mentioned. That's why you have instant backsliders. That's why you have unempowered, discouraged, depressed, suicidal people in Christianity, because we don't preach a delivering, transforming, and empowering gospel. We teach metaphysical abstractions about salvation. I fully preach the gospel, he says. How? Romans 15. How did he fully preach the gospel? By signs and wonders in Illyricum and all around. But if you're going to be the kind of person that says, not you, but the rhetorical you, that says, well, you know, we don't teach the apostles' experience, we experience their teaching, you've just wiped that verse out. And nobody wants to be honest about that verse because of charismatic-y, abusey type stuff.
Thanks, Steve. Hard hitting as ever. For my role in this, I mean, I as some of you will know, I pastored a church for, well, pioneered and pastored a church for 20 years, 20-ish more years. And since I've done what God has asked me to do, and that was to step away from the traditional model, I've been more fulfilled and seen more people open to the gospel by just being Steve.
Right.
Not being Steve, actually. No, I don't want to be Steve, but just by being like Steve says. And it's great. I mean, we've done all this stuff over the years, you know. I mean, I can remember the churches in Redditch. We all gathered together and we walked around the circumference of Redditch. Every church took a part, and we dropped little bits of red wool on Easter weekend. You know, I was commissioned to make stakes, wooden stakes. We drilled out the top, put a little scroll with scripture in, and then we drove them into every entry point. We drove them into the foundations of the town. You know, we've done the flag waving at every entry point. Do you know what? Nothing, like you say, Steve, nothing changed. Nothing changed whatsoever. And sort of having been on that journey, but now actually what is real for me is, I mean, Mick and I are both part of a men's breakfast, and we get together and have breakfast together. And there's, you know, the fellowship that goes on there and the reality that happens either on Zoom or when we're able to meet face to face. It's just, for me, it's breathtaking and it's real. And like you say, it's visible, you know, and I could not ever go back to the way I did church. And I have to say, I did church because I can do good church. You know, I think you probably heard me say before, give me a room and a PA and some musicians and a gang of people, and I can do good church. And that's the problem. Jim's good at doing church. but it's not. That's not reality, and often it's working from the invisible because it's untangible. So very hard hitting, Steve.
Thanks.
Thank
Can I
you.
give just a quick PS to Richard's question earlier, which was a great question.
Absolutely,
Just
and I think Philip's got something he wants to say as well.
Okay.
So
this will be brief. This will be brief. But Brother Eugene Peterson's translation just flowed through my head. Of course, he passed away just recently, a few years ago. But in one of the earlier Ephesians passages, he translated this way: the free flowing rhythms of grace. I mean, it's just a beautiful rendering to the antidote to that self-production or self thing that Richard was bringing up. No, we want to find I think he even said the easygoing, free-flowing rhythms of grace, and that includes I might not do anything because if God's not doing it, I'm not involved. I only do what I see my Father doing. So it's not that little Christian production factory mentality. That's not it at all. And Philip, you had something?
Yes. I don't come from a charismatic background, quite a legalistic background. But as I said, I've been out of it for so many years. But when you mentioned something just a few minutes ago about experiencing the apostles' teaching, I'm thinking, what's that? I mean, it sounds so funny. So what is that? I mean, how can you, I don't even know what it means.
Well, it just means it's a flimsy cliche to invalidate anything that they may have experienced as human beings. It's a flimsy cliche to say we teach the doctrines from the Bible, not what they may or may not have experienced in relationship with Jesus. So every it's a way to dismiss every temporal interaction in either the Gospels or the Book of Acts.
I don't know when you normally complete this, and it may be that there's not enough time now, but I could just drop in an opposite thought to the one I had. And one is that, well, a number of the Brits will know Sikh communities are very, very harmonious and loving. They make a point of that. But I have a number of Sufi Muslim friends, and they kind of put us guys to shame. But if the measure of things was to be like our Father, they would be better than most of us, or not. I'm talking about the seven of us. So what point do we make to say yes to them, but something about Jesus?
We're right back to the issue of governance again. Two central things: the name, literally the name above all names, and then the centrality of the cross and what is seen through the cross. And I what I'm about to say, I have blatantly hijacked from Brad Jersick because it's so memorable. What do we see at the cross? Radically forgiving, self-giving, co-suffering love. See, you're right. Any fraternal organization can go around and being a good human being, and great, good. Bring good into the world. Do good to everybody. That's great. But for us, the name and those qualities is what differentiates it from just a bunch of people who are trying to do good stuff. Because in the name, and we're right back to manifestation again, because in the name is the manifestation of the life of Christ, of the qualities of the resurrected God-man that no human being can fake or duplicate. And particularly on the element of co-suffering. I'll give money, I'll pray for you, I'll bring you food. but I got my own problems. Don't ask me to feel what you feel. Don't ask me to enter into your pain. Don't ask me to weep with you, right? So now we're into those issues, the Christian issues of identification. And you're right, it's a topic that nobody talks about, Richard, and we could even pursue that next time we're together. But that's the difference. So while all those things are wonderful, good, needed, they're blessed because we're bringing, goodness into the time and space. I don't have any problem with that. But on the question of differentiation, we do it in the name. And in that name is everything we've talked about today. So for instance, and this is not entirely hyperbolic or imaginary on my end. So my neighbor has just lost her wife. And lost his wife. Sorry, I wasn't trying to make a gender statement there. That's just a slip of the tongue. Okay, I'm motivated by compassion. I'm going to go bring him a meal, and I'm going to go show him some compassion. See, a Sikh can do that. A fraternal organization can do that. A Muslim can do that. But what if I go and I lay hands on his son and his son gets healed? Or what if I go as I'm bringing that meal and I talk and I bring them and I reveal to them the secret of the hearts? You see, that is what those other groups can't do. And again, that's why for me, the issue of the gifts of the Spirit is not peripheral, because it's a differentiation. Now, if you want to get into the occult and the fact that they can be faked, I understand that. So then we're back to the ethics, that threefold cord of ethics. So it's both. We bring a cruciform death and resurrection ethic plus compassionate service in the name to my neighbor. That's something they can't do. But your average Christian is not taught this. They're actually taught against this, and that is too much to expect. And particularly those who have a chip on their shoulder towards manifestations of the Spirit, or who have just been hurt, abused, or otherwise just have no experience. Let's say, do you follow the example? We're supposed to be able to deliver the qualities of the resurrection life of Jesus, not just the good works of compassion and care, which are valuable in themselves and they're not to be demeaned. But you and I are supposed to be able to bring something different. Now that puts pressure on us. And then we're right back to the front end of Richard's conversation. If I'm not secure and if I'm not well in my psychology, you'll crash. You'll crash because you just never measure up. But it's about bringing the reality of the life of Jesus. And guys, this is not theory for me. I've done it. I've seen it done. I've been in communities where it's done. I've been in communities where children know how to do it. Children do it. And it's incredible. It's incredible. So I know this is not like high bar type stuff for the super achievers. This is very reachable. Death and resurrection, the name of Jesus, and actually delivering the quality of his life. It's interesting. I've heard anecdotal stories, and I know they're anecdotal, but I believe they're legitimate. And some of you probably heard it, like what's going on in the Islamic world today. How is God reaching Islamicists? He's not arguing with them about the Bible. He's not arguing with them about Trinitarian doctrine, but he's revealing himself in dreams and visions and signs and wonders. And Islamicists are coming to Jesus in bucketfuls. But for your average Western Christian, if you're not leading with the Bible and arguing about a doctrine, we don't even know how to reach people. And your average Christian is taught against it. The cessationist, non-charismatic, evangelical, those things passed away. We have the Bible now. So we're going to lead with the Bible.
Got a bit of a question. I feel quite challenged by what you've said, Steve.
So do I.
Because I know that I've come away, and like I mentioned, I've actually started writing a book recently, and I was intended about 2 years ago, but I quote a lot from other writers, and now I've decided I'm going to do it with coming from myself, because I lost it all on the internet or on my hard drive, because I deleted it by mistake.
That's terrible when that happens.
And I'm trying. What the focus is on is actually, the name of it is actually, well, what I've decided at the moment is rethinking the Christian life. So what I'm actually going down to some real things, which are things that I wouldn't have believed maybe 6 or 8 years ago, but rather the last 4 years. And I'm feeling very uncomfortable, because I sometimes wake up in the morning, I'm thinking, maybe I'm being a bit heretical, because it's very much of a solo effort, obviously, with my prayer and listening to God. But this thing about visible and invisible, it's something I've never sort of seen it from that way. The main thing I'm trying to focus on is not to try to become like Jesus, but actually learn to live by his life that indwells me and indwells every one of us. And that is something that I learned quite a few years ago, but I'm also looking at the new creation. Actually is my first chapter. So I'm doing a totally new look on the new creation, which I learned through some, just by re-looking at, especially that passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. So, and I've discussed that, I think, some points of view in the past. So I'm thinking, well, am I somewhat heretical maybe? There's a doubt in my mind. I'm just kind of thinking, wonder why I feel like that sometimes.
I wouldn't worry about it. I think one of the American forefathers, Thomas Jefferson, said in the political realm, he says, a little revolution now and then is necessary. But normally the church progresses on the fringes of thought. Fringes of thought are resisted. They become challenged. They become reconsidered. They become modified. They become balanced, and then they move into the mainstream of thought. And Michael Hartman has pointed out sometimes it only takes 100 years for that process. So if it was me, I wouldn't worry about that. I would just get on with it, and then I would just present my stuff to somebody else to double check for me. Make sure I'm not totally crazy. Another quick miscellaneous thought. We'll stop here in about 5 minutes. We've gone a little long today because we started a little late today. Years ago, and this is available on my webpage, and if you're interested, I'll put the link up in the WhatsApp thing when I find it. But I got started thinking about, well, why did 2,000 people in a day, or why would a first century non-believer want to join this community when it's going to cost you? It may cost you your life, it'll cost you your reputation, it'll cost you your family relationships, might cost you your job. What was it that the unbelieving world said about the Christian community? So I did a little bit of history work, and it wasn't deep, but just a little bit. And what I did is I read what the critics of Christianity were saying about Christianity. Because the problem, when you read your own reviews, like, oh, we're wonderful, our teaching is wonderful, we have a dynamic worship team, our children's ministry is tremendous. And I must tell you, when I did that article probably 10 years ago now, when I was done, I just broke down crying, because it's like what Jim just said earlier. Here I am pastoring a church, and I am not doing anything in my church of the top 7 things that meant something to other people. Otherwise, my pastor in a church was completely driven by Christian ego and narcissism. Everything we were doing didn't even make the top 10 of the things that are important to the world. And so for me, it was a beginning of this thing unwinding too. Philip, to your question, it's like, my God, what are we doing? This is insane. So the preaching didn't matter, the latte bar in the foyer didn't matter. And it was just a a pivotal moment in my own spiritual journey about reconsidering some of these things. To your point about, am I a heretic? Yeah, probably from people on the outside are going to say so, and people who don't get it, or people who have something to defend because the status quo is where they get their financial income.
Mm.
What we're talking about is not going to make anybody happy. But top 7 things, and we were doing none of them. And that was part of the beginning of me getting out, because he said, I cannot continue to do this. Can't. How can I be part of the solution if I'm dependent on a paycheck that's paying me to do all these things that nobody cares about except us? And it was a real come to Jesus moment. So if anybody wants to read that article, I'll find a link and I'll put it up there for you.
Brilliant. Thank you,
One of
Steve.
the things which takes away, sorry, Jim, were you?
No, you carry on.
One of the things which can take away a lot of stress, Philip, is when Jesus says, don't worry about what you're going to say. And Jesus was talking about the Spirit of God will give you the words to say. And it seems to me it's a matter of just stepping out the way and letting the Spirit of God flow through you, which takes off all the strain from yourself. And the words that you're going to speak are going to be a lot less dumber than the words that you would have spoken.
Amen.
And just don't worry, because anyway, if you're opening yourself out to the Spirit of God, the love of God will flow through you, whether you speak or whether you don't. And you're going to meet with whoever it is that you're communicating with on a deep level, whereby people will see the Lord in you.
Yeah.
Because as Stephen said earlier, it's about the cross. We died there and we rose from the dead there. So you're not an independent person. You're not a fixed person.
Right.
In a solid kind of mold. You are part of a new race that Jesus started at the cross.
Yes.
So it just takes the sweat off totally. So it's not even a matter of being you, it's a matter of being him, or a matter of him being in you, however you want to put it. But don't worry about what you've got to say, because if you're worried about what you've got to say, in a sense, you're somehow gone into unbelief. Because if you believe that you died with him, you died and your life is hid with him, Colossians 3:3, therefore it's not you anyway.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mick. I always, Mick will have heard me, and I always bang on around it's easy to love your neighbour as yourself, especially if you're full of self-loathing and
Yeah.
if you've only experienced a very minuscule amount of love, it's
Yeah.
And the concept of love that you have within your own heart and within your own mind and spirit can be, nobody can tell what that is, but to love one another as I have loved you, and they will see that. That's a whole different story.
Yes, sir.
That's visible. That's living that life. That's living, as Jesus showed us. Is everybody done?
I need to be done. Sorry.
Okay, good. I hope that Jean and Murdoch, you get your power on soon.
We get our power on soon.
Yes.
Yeah.
It actually came on before we left. So.
Right, that's good. Steve, would you just seal the deal for us, and then we'll go on our way.
All right. Father, I thank you for everybody that's been on this call, friends new, friends old. Thank you for the assurance that we have of your faithfulness to us, in us, and through us. And we are just desirous to bring the life of Christ into time and space, and you're more desirous than we are. Father, take those things that were profitable today, and just distributed them to the most beneficial way to everybody in the different place where they're at, and get the most benefit for your name's sake in them. We thank you for it. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all for joining us. We'll let you know what the next stage is, or when the next meeting is, and wherever you are in the world, whatever you're doing, may you be blessed.
Amen.
See you soon.
Bye-bye now.
Thank
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.